I am the pillow that still carries the scent of an unlived love. What if the love of your life was by your side every day, but you never had the courage to look each other in the eye and tell the truth? What if a perfume forgotten on a piece of cloth kept what you never had time to live? I am the pillow that still carries the scent of a love not lived, and that is the story I could never forget. I'm just a pillow, the kind that no one really notices, except when they need an improvised lap or when the world seems too big and their head too heavy to hold up. I've been thrown to the floor, hugged tightly, forgotten on the couch for days. But all of that was different when they were here. This room knew the most beautiful sound in the world, the laughter of two souls who, even without knowing it, were always about to love each other. The silence that lives here today is thick, almost solid, as if every wall had been lined with the absence of the two. And I'm the only one who remained. Because objects, unlike people, don't know when it's time to go. The first time I saw Luisa, she came through the door carrying 2 boxes and a plant. She had a small smile, like someone who was still trying to find their feet after a storm, and the look in her eyes that showed she was hoping that this place would be a new beginning. The sofa creaked when she sat down for the first time, half exhausted, half relieved. It was there that she placed me on her lap, as if asking for company without knowing it. It wasn't long before Raphael arrived. One of those meetings arranged by fate or through social media, roommates, sharing rent, practicality. He arrived with 2 suitcases and a guitar without strings. He had an unshaven beard and eyes that always seemed to carry some unresolved story. When the two greeted each other, it was as if something had settled in the air, even if they themselves didn't realize it. In the beginning, they were just 2 strangers living together. But I was there every day, and I can tell you, their souls recognized each other before their own hearts understood. It was in the small gestures. Luisa preparing chamomile tea when Raphael came back tired from work, Raphael changing the bathroom light bulb without her asking, just because he realized she couldn't reach it. And I, always nearby, on the couch, in the armchair, sometimes on the living room floor, watching everything happen. A silent witness to a bond that was slowly tightening, like someone delicately intertwining their fingers, afraid of scaring someone. They laughed a lot. About silly things, bad movies, and failed attempts to cook together. Raphael had a habit of singing out of tune while washing the dishes, and Luisa said it was the happiest soundtrack she had ever heard. Sometimes, she would lie down on the couch with a book and he would sit on the floor, leaning against my side, their shoulders almost touching. On other nights, they would both be silent, just sharing the same space as if they were saying, "I'm here," without needing words. I was always the support, the place between them, absorbing the warmth, the smiles, the sighs that they didn't let escape. But time passed and with it came fear. The fear of messing up what was comfortable, of turning friendship into love and perhaps losing everything along the way. They knew they were important to each other, but this importance paralyzed them. No one wanted to take the first step. And I, with my fabric already a little worn, remained there, between the two of them, silently hoping for a touch, a gesture, anything that would break that invisible wall. I remember one particular night. It was raining outside, and the light from the television made shadows dance across the walls. They had chosen an old movie, the kind that only played in the early hours of the morning. Luisa was lying with her head on me, her feet tucked up, covered up to her chin. Raphael was beside her, his arm on the headrest, his eyes on her more than on the screen. And then, for a second, their hands touched. It wasn't by chance. It was slow, almost imperceptible, as if they were both asking for permission. But no one said anything. And the moment passed. These moments began to accumulate, like unsent letters, like interrupted confessions. I felt it. I felt it in the weight of the silences, in the prolonged glances that always ended with a shift in attention. I felt it in the nights when Luisa would come back later, trying to avoid that environment that was beginning to hurt because it was so full of unsaid things. I felt it in Raphael, who began to spend more time locked in his room, as if he wanted to escape from himself. But still, no one left. And I remained there, firm, waiting, like someone who keeps a promise made in the dark. A pillow has no voice, but it has memory. And my memory is made of her scent, her warmth, and the love that almost was. The days became gentle routines, like songs without a chorus, with light footsteps through the apartment hallways and conversations that always seemed to avoid the center of my chest. Louisa would wake up earlier, leave the coffee ready, walk through the living room with her eyes still puffy from sleep and arrange me on the couch with affection, as if she were taking care of something without realizing she was taking care of it. Then she would disappear down the hallway, and the sound of the shower was the soundtrack of the morning. Raphael would come right after, barefoot, with messy hair, and he would collapse on the couch as if each day were a challenge overcome. He would drink his coffee in silence, read something on his cell phone, and sometimes just stare into space, as if he were waiting for an answer to come from the ceiling. They passed each other in the rooms, like two planets orbiting the same sun, but never touching. Their coexistence was like an invisible choreography, made up of brief glances, restrained smiles, touches that never happened. They shared everything. The bills, the grocery shopping, the responsibilities, the silences. But they never shared what really mattered, what pulsed behind each gesture. And I, from my corner, felt it. I felt how each one, little by little, was collecting the other's small gestures as silent proof of something greater, of a love that grew hidden, like a flower that blooms in a rock crevice. Louisa had a habit of humming old songs while washing the dishes. Raphael always laughed and said that she was worse at singing out of tune than he was. But he liked it. He liked it so much that when she traveled to visit her parents and the house was silent, he would play the same songs quietly. He would look out the window, holding a cup in both hands, and say to me as if speaking to nothing, "It's empty without her, isn't it?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to say yes, it really was. That the sofa missed the way she folded the blanket, that the floor missed the sound of her footsteps, that I missed the sweet scent she left every time she sat next to me. And Louisa, oh, she also hid the world inside her chest. Sometimes she would sit on the floor, lean her back against me, and sigh deeply. Once, she whispered to herself, "He'll never know," and stayed there, quiet, looking at the ceiling as if the ceiling could tell her what to do. There were days when she would prepare 2 plates of dinner, even when he said he would be late. And she would leave a note on the fridge in red pen. "Heat it up when you get home. It tastes like love." And he would eat in silence, as if savoring an absence. They knew each other. They knew each other's quirks, schedules, and weaknesses. Raphael would leave chocolates on her bedroom doorstep when she said she had a bad day. Louisa would organize his books by color, just to tease him, and then she would mess everything up because he said the mess was part of his charm. They would argue sometimes over small things, like someone testing their limits. But they always ended up laughing afterwards, as if they were fighting just to remind each other that they cared. No one there was a saint. There were days when Raphael would lock himself in his room and shut the world out, and Louisa would knock on the door just once, then give up. There were nights when she would cry quietly in the living room, and he would pretend not to hear, because he didn't know how to help. But even in these failures, there was care. Because their love was like that, shy, camouflaged, made of omissions that screamed. I often wondered how 2 hearts could be so close and yet so attached at the same time. How they could know so much about each other and yet never say the essential thing. The entire apartment breathed this sweet tension, this gentle melancholy of someone who has everything to be happy, but is one step away. Just one. And the fear of taking that step was what kept everything frozen. There was a ritual they had created without realizing it. Every Friday after dinner, they would watch an old movie together. She would choose, he would complain about the choice, but in the end they would end up lying on the couch, sharing the same blanket, their feet intertwined, their hands almost touching. And I was always there in the middle, feeling the pressure of their bodies, the warmth of the almost. It was beautiful to watch, but it also hurt. Because every Friday ended the same, with a whispered good night, a long look, and each one went to their room. Their lives went on like this, between comfort and cowardice, between laughter and silence, between everything that was and everything that could be. And I stayed there in the same place, waiting for the day when one of them would finally have the courage to cross the couch, cross the fear, and say, "I love you." But that day always seemed a little too far away. It was between the lines of everyday life that the love between Luisa and Raphael blossomed, subtle, silent, like a plant that grows in the shade and yet insists on seeking the light. They never held hands in the middle of the street, never hugged for too long, never said, "I missed you," while looking into each other's eyes. But each of their gestures said it so strongly that only someone very distracted would not notice. And I, who had neither eyes nor ears, but absorbed everything through the skin of the fabric, knew about each hidden affection, each care disguised as routine. They were small gestures, so small that only those who truly love would be able to understand. Raphael always remembered how she liked her coffee, strong, unsweetened, with a hint of cinnamon that she said reminded her of her grandmother's house. Even on the days when he woke up late, he would make it just right and leave the cup in the same place, next to the door. He never said anything, never expected thanks. But every morning, Luisa would smile silently when she found that simple gift. And she would respond in the only way she knew how, by folding his shirt and leaving a chocolate hidden in his pocket, one of those cherry ones that he pretended not to like, but that he always ate with a smile. Rainy days were the most intimate. On those gray afternoons, the apartment became a refuge. Luisa made hot chocolate, Raphael picked up a stack of old movies, and the two of them would throw themselves on the couch, sharing a worn blanket that was already part of the scenery. It was at those moments that the connection between them vibrated strongest. They didn't say anything, sometimes they didn't even laugh, but the silence between them was comfortable, as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them there. I would stand in the middle, between the two of them, absorbing the heat of their bodies, the weight of her head when she leaned against me, his arm that almost touched her shoulders. It was a choreography of almost encounters. And there were the nights when she wrote. Luisa had a notebook hidden in the bottom drawer of her desk. Sometimes, I would see her from afar, sitting on the floor, with a pen between her fingers, her eyes lost, writing as if pouring out her heart. Raphael never knew or pretended not to know. He, on the other hand, composed songs that he never showed to anyone. He would stay in his room with the door ajar, strumming chords on his silent guitar, murmuring verses that had her name hidden among the rhymes. And I, between one room and another, felt how those unspoken words floated through the air, crossed the hallways, tried to reach each other, but died halfway. There was one day in particular that stayed with me. Luisa came home early from work, her face tired, her eyes filled with a sadness that even she couldn't explain. Raphael was in the kitchen, preparing pasta, their emergency meal. When he saw her, he simply held out his arms. She didn't hesitate. She went over to him, rested her face on his chest, and stayed there. For long minutes, in silence. He didn't ask her anything. He just held her. And I, on the couch, felt a tear run down her cheek, as if she had finally found shelter. Afterwards, they had dinner in silence. She ate little. He washed the dishes alone. And before going to sleep, he left a note on her pillow. Some days it's enough to know that someone sees you. She put the note in her wallet. It was like that. Their love had no grand declarations, no vows, no moonlit promises. But it was everywhere. In the way he always left the porch light on when she went out at night. In the way she always knew when he needed silence. In the way they both protected each other, even without touching. The pillow that carried so much of their presence, was becoming part of it too. Her perfume was permeating me, a sweet scent, with a hint of lavender, and whenever she sat next to me, Raphael seemed to breathe more slowly, as if that scent were the answer to a question he didn't yet know how to ask. Sometimes, he would touch her lightly, with the excuse of adjusting the blanket, or picking up the remote control. And his heart would race. I could feel it. He would dig his fingers deeper into me, trying to contain what was bubbling up. But time passed, and nothing changed. The fear of losing what was already good paralyzed any attempt to discover if it could be better. It was as if they both preferred to live in the safety of better not to risk it, of what if it goes wrong. And so, day after day, they loved each other in silence, in secret, in gestures too small to be noticed by those who look from the outside, but enormous for those who carry everything inside their hearts. And I, who couldn't speak, just hoped. I hoped that one day, one of them would realize that life doesn't wait. That love is also courage. That words need to be said before time steals the chance to say them. Because their love was already everything. All that was left was to be lived. It was a Friday, like so many others, but there was something in the air that made everything seem different. Maybe it was the persistent rain that drummed on the windows like an anxious heart. Maybe it was the choice of movie, an old classic about impossible loves. Or maybe it was just the weather, which, after so many nights of silence and averted glances, had finally decided to push the two of them closer together. Luisa arrived with wet shoulders, her hair tied in a loose bun, and that crooked smile that only appeared when she was too tired to pretend she was fine. Raphael, upon seeing her, simply said, "Go get changed, I'll make popcorn." She nodded with a tired look and went to the bedroom. I was already on the couch, in my usual spot, with the blanket folded beside me, waiting for another night of almost dates to begin. But something inside me told me that this one would be different. Raphael came back with a bowl of popcorn in his hands and a relaxed expression of someone who felt at home. A little later, Luisa joined him, wearing the gray sweatshirt he once lent her and she never returned. She sat down slowly, pulling the blanket over her legs, and placed me on her lap, as she always did when she unknowingly sought comfort. The movie began. A story full of sighs and disagreements, with a soft soundtrack and intense dialogue. They watched in silence, but their eyes betrayed what was going on inside. With each scene of Unlived Love, their gazes met briefly, and the two seemed to see themselves reflected on the screen. Raphael fiddled with the popcorn without eating. Luisa drummed her fingers on the seam of the blanket. And I, between the two of them, felt the tension rising, like a tide approaching the beach with contained fury. At one point, there was a scene where the protagonists almost kissed. The sound of the rain grew louder, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Luisa sighed deeply, leaning lightly against Raphael. He didn't move. Or rather, he moved just enough for their shoulders to touch. It wasn't an accident. Nothing was an accident between them anymore. And I, pressed between them, felt the heat rise. Our hearts beat faster as if they knew something was about to happen. The film continued, but they were no longer paying attention. Luisa's eyes were fixed on the screen, but distant. Raphael watched her from the side, with a care that hurt. And then, in the most absolute silence, he leaned in a little. Just a little. Enough so that their faces were dangerously close. Enough so that her breath caught, and her eyes trembled, not knowing whether to look at his mouth or at the floor. It was just a second in which the universe stopped. A second in which any word would have been enough. But no one said anything. He stopped. He came back slowly, and pretended to look for the popcorn. Luisa also moved away a little, adjusting the blanket as an excuse. The movie continued, but the moment had passed. And I, who carried that moment with me, knew that a door had been opened, and then slammed shut. The almost kiss remained between them like an uncomfortable secret, a step that had almost been taken and now echoed like an unanswered question. When the movie ended, Raphael murmured, "Good movie," and she replied, "It's beautiful." But their tones of voice were different. There was something broken in the air, like thin cracked glass, about to shatter. Luisa stood up first. She said, "Good night," with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He sat there for a few more minutes, staring at the blank screen. Then he got up, turned off the lights, and went to his room, leaving the hallway in darkness. I remained on the couch, with the scent of both of them still mixed in me. I could still smell her perfume, soft, melancholic. And the touch of his hands, heavy, indecisive. I wanted to be able to speak, to scream, to say that that moment was all they needed, that their love was already there, just waiting for courage. But I was just a pillow. And pillows don't scream. They only keep. They keep what was, what almost was, and what maybe never will be. That night, the entire apartment seemed to sigh. A long, tired sigh, full of everything that was left unsaid. And I, with the fabric dampened by time and the heat of bodies that had not touched, fell asleep hoping that the next day would bring another chance. Because their love, even if silent, still pulsed. And what pulses, one day, can awaken. The next morning dawned strangely. The rain had gone, but the sky was still covered in thick clouds, as if the world outside was trying to reflect what had been left hanging between Luisa and Raphael. In the apartment, the silence was different, not the comfortable silence of other days, but one filled with exaggerated caution, as if any word could make everything fall apart. I was there, in the corner of the sofa, with the fabric still warm, impregnated with her perfume. A perfume that said more than any conversation they had had that night. Raphael was the first to leave the room. He walked barefoot to the kitchen, put the water on to boil, but forgot the cinnamon. Luisa appeared a few minutes later, with her hair down, her eyes a little puffy. When she saw the cup ready, she smiled with one corner of her mouth, but the smile faded before it reached her eyes. "You forgot the cinnamon," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "Yeah," he replied without looking at her. "Sorry. My head is full." "Mine too," she said, and for a moment their eyes met. Then they looked away. The day went on like this. Loose words, restrained gestures. Each one trying to act as if nothing had happened, as if the almost kiss the night before was just a figment of their imagination. But the tension wouldn't go away. It was as if they had touched an invisible line that held everything together, and now they were afraid of pulling too hard and breaking it. That night, Luisa arrived home from college first. She had had a long day, and her eyes were tired. She threw her bag on the floor, turned on the low light in the living room, and sat down on the sofa. She picked me up as she always did, but this time she buried her face in mine. She sighed long and deeply, and there, in that moment, she left a little more of herself embedded in my skin. I knew. I felt it. That was a kind of hug, even though there were no arms. A kind of silent confession. Shortly after, Raphael came in. He stopped when he saw her like that. He stood there for a while at the door of the room, watching. Then he walked towards her, slowly. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice low. She lifted her face, her eyes moist, but not crying. "I don't know," he replied. "It's all so weird." He sat down next to her, without touching her. "Is it for yesterday?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at me, held me close to her chest, and then looked at Raphael. "It was just a movie, right?" He hesitated. Then he shook his head. It wasn't just a movie. And also, it wasn't just a moment." Silence fell. But this time it was a silence full of truth. She let out her breath slowly. "I'm scared, Raphael. Scared of ruining what we have. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of losing you." "Me too," he said. "But the truth is, I already feel lost. Ever since I met you, Luisa, I've been waiting every day for something I never have the courage to look for. You here by my side, every day, and yet it seems so far away." She ran her hand through her hair, took a deep breath, and her eyes filled with tears. "I feel the same way. But I don't know if I'm ready to take that risk. Sometimes I feel like what we have is everything. Other times, I feel like we're missing out on something huge. I hear you laughing in the kitchen and I want to run to you. I hear you silent in the bedroom and I wish I could hug you. But I never know if I can," he said in a whisper. "You always could," she replied, almost as a confession. And then, silence again. But this time there was warmth. There was closeness. They were telling each other everything slowly, carefully, as if they were putting together an ancient puzzle. Raphael moved a little closer, and his knees touched hers. His hand rested on my side, and he smelled my perfume. "That smell is yours," he said, closing his eyes for a moment. "I always stay with you when I need to think," she smiled. "I think this pillow is my safe place." I almost trembled with emotion, as if my essence, my entire existence, made sense at that moment. Carrying her perfume was like carrying a story. A weight. A love that had not yet been declared out loud, but that had been living there for a long time. Raphael smiled. "So maybe we just need more time. And courage." "Maybe," she replied. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't hug. But they stayed there, side by side, with their feet touching, their hands slowly crossing, and my body absorbing the weight of that almost love that, little by little, was taking shape. And me? I closed my invisible eyes and gave thanks. Because even if nothing else happened, I was already part of something eternal. The days that followed were like warm breezes before a storm. There was more lightness between them, more looks that lingered, more shared silences that were no longer uncomfortable, but instead full of possibilities. Raphael smiled more. Luisa was more distracted, as if carrying a sweet secret. The mornings tasted like a new beginning, and the nights, well, the nights seemed to want something more, something they didn't dare touch yet. And I, faithful sentinel of this shy love, felt the vibration of all this passing through me like a gentle current of energy. It was like living in a dream that was finally beginning to take shape. But dreams are sometimes too fragile. It was on a random afternoon, one of those seemingly insignificant ones, that everything began to fall apart. Luisa was cleaning the bookshelf in the living room, moving books from one side to the other, dusting them, organizing the usual chaos that Raphael always said was part of his creativity. She laughed to herself when she found an old VHS tape with a handwritten label, Raphael 2007 School Show. When she picked up a cardboard box that had been forgotten at the back of the furniture, she didn't expect to find what she found. A letter. The envelope was yellowed, its edges creased by time. The addressee's handwriting was feminine, and her name wasn't Luisa. With her heart racing and her chest tight with an inexplicable premonition, she opened it. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes ran over the written words with emotion and longing. It was a love letter. A love that had not been lived. A love that Raphael tried to forget but kept. Each line revealed feelings he had for another woman, long before Luisa came into his life, but the intensity was what hurt the most. It was as if he was still in love. As if part of him still belonged to that past. Luisa sat on the floor, holding the letter in her hands, her eyes fixed on nothing. I was there, on the couch, watching from above as her world split in two. The paper trembled between her fingers, and her eyes burned. She wasn't crying, not yet. But inside her, something was screaming. Insecurity. The fear of just taking up space in the heart of someone who had never let her in completely. When Raphael arrived, she was still sitting, motionless. Lou? He called, seeing the heavy silence in the air. Is everything okay? She stood up slowly, handing him the letter without saying a word. He took it, read the first line, and his face changed. Time seemed to stop. Where did you find this? On the shelf. It was with the tapes, he replied, his voice firm but trembling. Lisa, that's old. Very old. I didn't even remember I still had that letter. But he kept it. He hesitated. Yes. Because at the time, it was important. It was a love that never happened. It was confusing. But it ended. It's been years. Then why are you still here? Raphael ran his hand through his hair, sighed, and sat down on the couch next to me, looking tired. I don't know. Maybe because I never knew how to end things properly. Maybe because it hurt. And I left it there, forgotten, like everything we don't want to face. Luisa crossed her arms, her eyes filling with tears, but without letting the tears fall. Have you ever wondered if you're with me, or if you're just trying to forget her? Raphael got up quickly and approached her. Luisa, no. It's not that. I'm with you because I want to be. Because you make me feel things I've never felt. But that letter, it's just an echo. A ghost. What if that ghost still lives in there? Silence. Longthick. I felt everything. The heavy air, the pain in her eyes, the despair contained within. I need to think, she said, turning her face away. Please don't disappear, he whispered. Not now that I am trying to be whole with you. She picked up her bag, took a deep breath. I just need to understand what I am to you. Because loving someone who holds another person in their chest hurts too much. And then she left. The door closed slowly, but the sound was like a bang. Raphael fell to the floor, sitting with the letter in his hands, his gaze lost. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to hold Luisa. I wanted to tell him that the past sometimes needs to be buried with words, so that the present can blossom. But I could only absorb. The apartment fell silent. A silence of absence. A silence of loss. And I, with Luisa's perfume still strong on me, knew that nothing would be the same again. Night fell over the apartment like a heavy veil. The walls that once carried echoes of laughter now gave back only the hollow sound of empty footsteps. Raphael remained sitting on the living room floor for hours, the letter open on his lap, his eyes fixed on a random spot on the carpet. The pillow, me, was on the sofa, still carrying the warmth of Luisa's last hugs, her perfume clinging to the fabric like a stubborn memory that refused to disappear. Her absence was a new weight in that space, an emptiness that took over everything, as if every piece of furniture, every corner, knew that something important had gone. The phone went silent. Raphael didn't text or call. He didn't know what to say. And neither did Luisa, on the other side of the city. Pride, that old enemy of deep love, raised its barriers too high to be ignored. Neither of them had the strength to break down the wall. Neither wanted to give in. The letter became a symbol of an old wound, but the pain it caused was new, sharp, real. The next day, Raphael woke up early, as if he hadn't slept. He walked around the house like a shadow, aimlessly. He passed by the living room, looked at me for a moment, as if I had answers. He sat down on the sofa and murmured, "She thinks I still love someone who never existed. But it's her I love." He stood there for hours. He didn't eat. He didn't turn on the TV. He just breathed, as if he was waiting for time to erase what the words had caused. I absorbed everything. His anguish. His longing for her. The dense energy that now covered the place like a blanket of silence. On the other side, Luisa couldn't sleep either. Lying in a borrowed bed at a friend's house, she stared at the ceiling as if it could give her answers. Her eyes were red, her hands restless. What if he still loves her? He asked out loud, to no one. What if everything we've lived is just a distraction? The friend tried to calm her down. "Lou, sometimes we keep things from the past because we were afraid to face them. It doesn't mean we still feel them. It means it hurt. And that it's over." "But he didn't tell me," she countered. "What if I hadn't found that letter? Would he have told me? Maybe not. But it's not out of malice. It's out of fear. Fear of losing you." Luisa remained silent, a silence that hurts. Days passed. Days in which neither of them had the courage to take the first step. Raphael cleaned the house as if that could make her absence disappear. He folded her clothes that were left behind, tidied up the books she left scattered around, watered her plant with the care of someone trying to keep alive what is already departing. And I, on the couch, with my fabric starting to wear out from being squeezed so tightly in the early hours of the morning, was the only link between the two. I still carried her scent. I still held the warmth of the moments when she would lie on top of me, dreaming of something that now seemed so distant. One night, Raphael picked up his guitar. He put new strings on it. He tuned it carefully. He sat down in the living room and began to play a soft, sad melody, full of words he didn't have the courage to say out loud. "If you knew it was you, only you, I never kept anything other than your image," he sang, his eyes closed, his voice choked. The melody hung in the air, like a lament. That same night, Luisa woke up with a start. She had dreamed about him, about the room, about the letter. She got out of bed, grabbed her cell phone, wrote a message, deleted it, wrote it again, deleted it again. Pride spoke louder. The pain was still very fresh. She wanted him to say something, to knock on the door, to run after her. But Raphael didn't know if he would be welcome. And so, the two of them kept their distance, trapped in a cycle of doubts, guilt, and fear. The pride that separated them wasn't just theirs. It was from all the love stories that had already ended before they even began. It was the universal fear of loving and not being loved back, of being a bad investment, of giving oneself and not being accepted. And deep down, they both wanted the same thing, for the other to take the initiative, for someone to say, "Come on, let's try," despite everything. But nobody said. And so, their love, so full of gestures, so full of care, began to dissolve into silence. Not into anger, not into fighting, but into that sweet melancholy that only those who have loved in silence know. The apartment remained silent. Raphael continued working, living, eating little. Sometimes, he would stop in front of her door, touch the handle, hesitate, and give up. Other times, he would lie down on the couch with his face turned towards me, his eyes wet, and say, "Come back, Lou. Just come back." And I, helpless, could only keep it. Keep the love that remained. Keep the absence that grew. Keep her scent that, little by little, began to disappear. But even as it slowly faded, I knew her scent was still there. And while there is hope. Fill the room. It was a sanctuary before she was gone. It was where Luisa would read with her feet dangling over the edge of the bed, where Raphael would sometimes lie down next to her just to hear the sound of her breathing. It was there that the sun would come in softly in the morning, painting the sheets yellow, warming the pillows, and where, for a moment, life seemed lighter. But now the room was broken. Not into pieces on the floor, but into an invisible division that crossed the space like a cruel line, separating what was from what was left. Luisa had left behind more than just clothes. She had left behind the pillows she had arranged with specific habits, the books with pencil markings, a pair of earrings forgotten on the dresser, and the beige coat that Raphael always said made her look even more beautiful. Every corner was still hers, but it wasn't anymore. And that hurt more than any absence. Raphael avoided going in. He would pass by the half-open door, take a quick look, and then continue on, as if the room were a living memory that could bleed. But on one of those cold mornings, he couldn't resist. He opened the door carefully, as if asking for permission. He turned on the low light of the lamp, and everything seemed the same, and so different. I was there too. She would sometimes take me to sleep with her, especially on nights when her head was too heavy. I was left on the bed, next to her pillow. Raphael picked me up, sat up slowly, and took a deep breath, as if trying to inhale the past to find some trace of peace. "You're still here, right?" he murmured, his fingers digging into my fabric. "Your scent still hasn't gone away." And she hadn't gone. I still carried the lavender mixed with something sweeter, something that was only hers. A scent that couldn't be bought, couldn't be imitated. A scent that spoke of home, of embrace, of belonging. He lay down carefully, as if he was afraid the mattress would scream. He lay there, looking at the ceiling, then at the corner where she kept her slippers. A melancholy smile escaped. "You complained that I left my socks lying around, remember? And I said it was my modern decor." He laughed to himself, a sad laugh. "And you would get mad, but then you would come and fix everything. You always did." The laughter turned to silence. And the silence turned to tears. A single, timid tear, running down his face without making a sound. He didn't wipe it away. He let it run. He took my tissue and pressed it to his chest. "I should have told you. I should have told you about the letter, about everything. You deserved it. But I was scared. Scared that you would think I was weak. Trapped. But I'm not trapped by it. Look. I just forgot to throw it away. And now I've lost you." On the other side of the city, Luisa was also not sleeping. Sitting on the bed with someone else's sheets, looking out the window, she held her cell phone. The screen was lit, his name was there. A ring. Just one ring. But it didn't come. She typed something. She deleted it. She took a deep breath. And she spoke to her friend, more to herself than to anyone else. He could have said it. He could have opened his heart. But he preferred silence. The friend replied sweetly. "And you also kept quiet. Sometimes, Lou, two hearts do not meet because of a lack of love, but because they are too afraid to love." Luisa stood there, looking at the city, trying to understand if there was still time, if there was still space, if that love that began with small gestures could survive what was discovered. And in the room where it all began, Raphael slept with his face turned towards me, his arms around what was left. A hug for me, but thinking about her. A desperate attempt to keep something close, even if it was just the memory. The room was no longer just a room. It was an open wound. A portrait of what had been, divided between what he felt and what she had left behind. And I, in the middle of it all, continued to be the link between the two. Carrying the smell, the memory, the warmth, what no one had the courage to throw away. Because when love leaves, it doesn't just take the person. It takes pieces of the house, of the air, of time. But sometimes, he also leaves clues. Traces, signs that he can still come back. And me? I was still here. hoping that their love would find its way back. Through me. Through the scent that still lingered. There was no fighting, no shouting. There were no desperate pleas or broken vows. When Luisa returned to the apartment, days later, it was not to take back what she had left behind. It was only to look for what was still hers. Or at least, that was what she told herself. The taxi stopped in front of the building and, for a few seconds, she stood there inside, looking out the window as if looking at a place where not only her body, but her soul had lived. The sky was gray, but it was not raining. The kind of weather that seems to respect a heart saying goodbye. She climbed slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. When the door opened, Raphael was in the room, with an expression that mixed relief and fear. The silence between them was immediate, dense, but not hostile. It was a silence that said, I still feel it, but also, I don't know how to go back. I just came to get my things, Luisa said, in a low, almost respectful tone. Raphael nodded. He tried to smile, but the smile died before it could be born. She walked into the room, now even emptier. The clothes were folded on the bed, the books were stacked. The beige coat was draped over the chair. He had taken care of everything, and that hurt more than if he had left the room untidy, because it said he still cared. A lot. As she packed everything into her suitcase, her eyes inevitably stopped on me. The pillow that had so often held her dreams, her tears, her doubts. She picked me up with both hands, brought me to her face, and there it was, the perfume. Still there. Soft, almost a whisper. A reminder. A request. She squeezed her eyes shut, took a deep breath, and walked out of the room with the pillow in her arms. Raphael saw her with that and didn't say anything. He just looked at her, as if that image would stay with him for the rest of his life. She stopped at the door, her heart in her mouth. And time, once again, stopped. I thought you were going to run after me, she said, without anger, just sadness. I thought you didn't want me to run, he replied, his voice cracking. What if I wanted to? What if I was just waiting for a sign? What if I was afraid of not being enough? Silence. One more. But this one was different. It was the silence of someone who understands that time can be cruel, but it can also be generous if the heart is honest. Luisa sighed, adjusted her suitcase on her shoulder, and said, looking straight into his eyes, take care of the room. Don't let him be sad. And then she was gone. The door closed quietly, but the sound echoed through the entire house like a goodbye. Raphael stood still, not knowing what to do with his body. He sat on the couch. He looked at me, and he realized, she didn't take everything. She left me there. Me carrying her scent, her presence, her love. It was a small gesture, but loaded with meaning. Maybe she was saying, I'm not done yet. The following days were filled with mourning. Not mourning for death, but mourning for dormant love. Raphael continued his life with the gestures that remained. There were times when he would hold my cloth and cry softly. Other times when he would talk to me as if I could hear him. Does she still think about me? Does she miss me when she hugs some other pillow? But time, that old seamstress of torn hearts, kept doing his work, sewing slowly, in silence. Until one day years later, on any given afternoon, the doorbell rang. He opened the door, and there she was. More mature, with even sweeter eyes, the same perfume. I forgot something here, he said, smiling. Raphael didn't say anything. He just moved out of the way. She walked in, looked around, and then her eyes fell on me. I knew you wouldn't throw it away. I couldn't, he replied. Luisa took my hands, squeezed them, and said, it still smells like me. Raphael looked at her like the first time, like someone who sees hope return from where he least expected it. Maybe so we still have it too. She smiled. A smile full of peace, of new beginnings. Perhaps. And then they sat on the couch, side by side, just like before. No promises, no rush. And I, the pillow now between the two, was filled again with the scent of a love that had finally decided to be lived. Because sometimes, love goes, only to learn how to come back. Time had passed, but not like a river that sweeps everything away. It passed like someone observing, like someone testing the strength of the roots that formed in silence. Luisa and Raphael were now sitting side by side on the sofa where it all began. The same sofa, the same blanket folded in the corner, the same soft light from the lampshade that made shadows dance on the walls. And I, the pillow that had already absorbed so many silences, tears, perfumes and weights, now found myself once again in the place that had always been mine. Between them, as a bridge, as a witness, as a living memory of a love that had not been extinguished. It was different now. There was no anxiety, no rush. There was presence. Luisa rested her head on Raphael with the tranquility of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. And he looked at her with a light, grateful smile, like someone who finally understands that some things, the most valuable ones, cannot be forced, but only experienced when they arrive at the right time. "You're back," he said, breaking the silence sweetly. "I never left completely," she replied, with her eyes closed, as if speaking to herself. "And now? What do we do?" She chuckled softly. "We live. Slowly. Without fear. And if we get scared, we go along anyway." He took her hand and intertwined their fingers. They both laughed, like someone finally breathing after a long time underwater. And there, in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. The world outside could continue to spin with its urgencies, but in that small universe, the sofa, the cushion, the touch of their hands, there was peace. The afternoon stretched on, and soon night came. They made tea together. They chose an old movie, like in the old days. They shared the blanket, their feet touching. And this time, when their faces came close, there was no holding back. The kiss happened. Simple, sincere, like someone sealing an old pact, like someone saying, "I choose you," without using words. And me? I embraced them. I carried that moment in every fiber of my being. It was no longer just her scent that lived in me. It was the scent of both of them. It was complete. Sometimes, love needs to leave so that we realize how much it belongs to us. Sometimes, it needs to be silent so that we learn to listen. And other times, it just needs to wait. Wait for the right time, the right courage, the right gesture. And if you there, now, listening to this story, carry in your heart an unlived love, maybe there is still time. Maybe you just need to take a step. Maybe everything is waiting for you to say, "I feel it too." Because love, true love, it always finds a way to come back. And I, who was a pillow, who was a home, who was silence and embrace, can guarantee, he comes back, always comes back.